So now we're up to one of the most interesting panels in Camera Raw. It's called Camera Calibration. So if we go to our panel options, you'll notice there's a little camera icon. If we click on that, you'll see that your Camera Calibration panel appears. Now, the first thing that you're going to notice when you look at your Camera Calibration panel is the Process section, which contains a little drop-down menu. So as you can see here, it has 2010, which is the current process, and then you have 2003. Now, if you've worked on images in older versions of Camera Raw, what you'll notice is that the process in Camera Raw will automatically default to the older version. So in this example, I'm actually, the original file, I should say, was worked on using the 2003 process. Now, another way to tell whether you're using the older process of Camera Raw or whether you're using an up-to-date version is if you look down into the bottom right-hand corner here where the image is, you've got this little exclamation mark icon. And what this essentially is telling you that you're working on an older process and would you like to update to the current process. So in order to change the actual process itself, what you need to do is either select the actual drop-down menu in Camera Calibration and choose to select the current 2010 process, or you can, let's just drop it back 2003, or you can go and just click on this little icon and it'll automatically do it for you. And that icon displays throughout. It doesn't matter what actual panel you're in or what adjustments you're making, that little icon will be present if you're using the older process of Camera Raw itself. Now, Camera Raw 6 uses improved processes to calculate detailed adjustments. So photos that were edited the first time in Camera Raw use these newer processes. So the first time that a photograph is opened in Camera Raw, it'll use these new versions of this process. And if, as I said before, if you've actually edited a photo in an older version, it'll use the previous version. Now, the process version specifies which version of Camera Raw sharpening and noise reduction functions are used to adjust and render photos. So let's take a closer look at this image, for example. And let's zoom in on this lovely watch here. And we'll go to 200%. Now what you'll notice is, if I just hold down the Alt key on a PC or the Option key on a Mac, you'll notice that the little menu buttons down here have changed, and I'm going to click on Reset, and that'll just set it back to the old process. And what you'll notice is you can see quite a bit of chromatic aberration around this watch, and you can see a different way that it's been processed in terms of sharpening and noise. Now, if I go ahead and actually update the process itself, you notice that that changes. Now, to make it a bit more obvious, if I untick the preview and then tick the preview, you see how big a difference that actually changes in the photo, how well that improves the actual sharpening and detail of that watch. It's quite a really big improvement. So it does really allow you to actually get more out of your photographs. And you just want to be careful, because when you actually make these upgrades, sometimes, according to the types of images that you're using and the types of adjustments that you've done to those images, it can tend to upset or affect, say, some of the density or colors. And so you can see slight changes in the actual image when you do upgrade to a newer process. But all in all, the benefits are greater than having to make slight adjustments to your images, with those affected changes. So just take that into account. So you can retain your old process version of your photograph if you want, but I think that the improvements to the sharpening and noise reduction in Camera Raw are a big benefit to your photographs, and it's well worth upgrading them if you can. Now, underneath the actual process drop-down menu in the actual panel itself, you'll notice that you have a camera profile. Now, under here you have several different presets that you can choose from to use. And what these attempt to do is to mimic inbuilt in-camera process settings. So for example, if you're shooting with a camera and you have a Canon, I should say, you have several different preset settings built into your camera that you can set your images to when it actually processes your photos in camera as JPEGs, for example. So you could choose to use like a camera faithful or camera landscape, or the neutral, portrait, or standard presets that are actually in your camera. So what this menu essentially allows you to do is try and mimic those settings that are in your camera to get it closer to what you saw on the back of your camera as your JPEG preview when you actually took the photograph. You also have some old settings here, or new and old settings I should say. You have Camera Raw's 4.4 setting, and you also have the older version, and then you also have an Adobe standard here. So if we just jump back here and stick the image to fit to view again, we can drop down, we can actually go through some of these, and you'll actually start to see some slight changes in the actual color settings of the image, color settings, contrast, and densities of the image. So as you can see, there's, I mean, with the majority of them, this one looks quite nice, but some of them are a bit extreme, and so you can flick through them accordingly. But with this particular image, I have actually done a fair bit of editing to it already, so these are really standing out a bit too much for my liking. So I'm just going to leave that set to ACR 4.4, which was what I originally edited the photo under to begin with. Now underneath that, you actually have shadows, red primary, green primary, and blue primary. Now these can make extreme color and saturation adjustments and shifts in your images. So you really want to be careful if you're going to actually be playing around with these. You can get some quite dramatic effects. But the original intention of these actual sliders was not so you can do fancy effects. It was actually they're actually designed to assist in the color management and calibration of your digital camera. Underneath the camera profile, you have a number of different slider adjustments. You have shadows, red primary, green primary, and blue primary. Now, these sliders allow you to make some pretty extreme color and saturation adjustments to your images. So you really want to make sure that you be really careful when actually adjusting these, that you don't sort of go too far, because unless of course you're actually trying to create something that's really arty, because they can really create some very dramatic effects for your images, as you can see there. But in actual fact, these sliders were originally designed to assist with the color management and calibration of your digital camera, so that you could actually get the processed colors in Camera Raw to accurately match the colors found in the original scene that the photograph was actually taken in. Now the best way to go about achieving this is to actually go out and shoot a color chart underneath your lighting conditions, underneath the lighting conditions that you use most often, for example. So you could go out in the middle of the day or the afternoon, or even shoot this in the studio. And I've got an example of a Greg Tag Macbeth color checker color rendition chart here. Now these are really, really useful because essentially they provide you with a color chart that you can photograph and include in your photos, but they've also been read by a spectrometer, which has actually analyzed all those different color values and provided back the exact digital values in RGB that they should actually be. So what you can actually do by using the camera calibration panel here with these sliders is to calibrate your camera essentially. And what you would do is you'd go up and you'd use the little color sampler tool, and you could place a color sampler on the different areas, the different patches and different color patches of the actual color chart itself, and then you could go about adjusting these sliders in order to match those colors and those densities. So that the manufacturer of these charts actually provides you with the different values. And you'd actually use the color samplers here, and you'd actually try and get the RGB values to match what the actual manufacturer of this color chart has actually given you. So by making these adjustments to this, and also a couple of the other panels, say, you know, your exposure and things like that, in order to get the densities to sit right, you can end up with a camera calibration that is extremely accurate to the particular lighting conditions that you're actually shooting under at the time. And once you've actually done that and made those corrections so they actually are as close as possible to what has been provided to you, you can then go up to the little navigation, a little menu that's up here in the right hand corner, and you can choose to actually go and save these settings, which will bring up a little thing, and you can save all those settings and actually call them a particular name. So I can go here and I can call them say color chart blah blah blah, and color chart, and also provide a color temperature in the actual color chart name, so you know what color temperature it was shot under, and then you could save that. And once it's saved, it will then enable you to actually go back here, and you can actually go and load these settings. So you can load them up next time you shoot in this under the same lighting conditions. You can actually go and load up those presets, so you have all those settings and that you've done according to your camera calibration all ready for you to go for your next photographic shoot. You can also choose to actually set them as your camera raw defaults. Say, for example, if you're always shooting in a studio, then you'd always have the same lighting, for example. You could have those camera calibration settings set up permanently in Camera Raw every time that you do a photo shoot. So that's effectively going to reduce the amount of editing that you need to do in Camera Raw to your photographs, because you've already established the corrections that need to be made in order to achieve those specific values. But just remember that if you want to maintain the accuracy of these color presets, that you need to actually shoot under the same lighting conditions and color temperatures, because as I'm sure you're well aware, that if you shoot under a different color temperature, these colors are going to be reproduced entirely different. Not only that, make sure that your camera is set to the same ISO, because there's a big difference between setting your ISO at 100 and setting it to 3200, just because of the introduced noise that especially ends up in the blacks, and that can really shift the actual color values that you're actually sampling there and testing. So that's something to keep in mind when you're actually doing your camera calibration and photographing a color chart such as the one we're viewing.